And literally within, I think, the first 2 or 3 days of being on the list, we got a call. Got a liver for you. Get down here within 4 hours. And, so we get in the car and we're driving to Omaha. And I think I called everybody I've ever met in my life. I am ecstatic. I've got a new liver. I'm going to live. Get to Omaha. I'm on the gurney. The anesthetist had just talked to me. They're going to start wheeling me into surgery, and my wife's cell phone goes off. And it's the surgery team telling her to get me dressed and go back home because the liver isn't good enough to put in me.
Hello, this is Travis Barnes, and today I'm talking to a television news anchor and reporter who holds sort of a legendary status in my hometown in Iowa. We'll talk about his years in broadcasting, as well as a condition with his liver that he almost didn't make it back from. Hello, and thank you for joining me for the Rush Hour Interviews podcast. I realize I haven't done any of these for a while, but I'm going to try to be more devout and consistent in this new year, and hopefully you'll have some good interviews coming your way if you'd like to listen to these. I'm going to speak quickly because my interview with Larry Wentz ran pretty long today, and I didn't want to chop any of it out. But basically, Larry is a television broadcaster, anchor, and reporter in Sioux City, Iowa, which happens to be my hometown. And I got the opportunity to work with Larry for a short time, which I really enjoyed. So we'll talk a little bit about his years in broadcasting, some funny stories, some interesting things that he encountered in his career. And then the second part of this interview is actually we talk about a life-threatening illness that he had regarding his liver that almost claimed his life. These kind of stories are very interesting to me because so few people have been faced squarely in the eye with the prospect of dying and had to deal with that. So some of the emotions that come up and some of the thought patterns that occur as a result of that are very interesting to me. So make a long story short, I'm going to jump into the interview, but if you would, go out to iTunes and subscribe to the Rush Hour Interviews podcast or like it on Facebook. And if you're an Android user, there's an RSS feed that I have posted out on the Facebook page. So thanks a lot, and I hope you enjoy. You're from Minnesota, right?
Yeah, originally from Minnesota, a little town called Blue Earth, which the Indians called it Makota, which translates to Blue Earth. When the explorers came through there, they thought that the Earth looked really a deep, dark blue, and they thought it might hold some minerals like manganese and stuff like that in it. But it's just kind of really dark black dirt, blue dirt. So that's kind of where the name came from. And my career really started at a little 1,000-watt radio station, AM radio station in Blue Earth, Minnesota. So
I've driven by there before. I saw the Jolly Green Giant on the side of the road, but I never actually...
Blue Earth is famous for that as well. It's a huge, I think it's like 90-foot tall plastic green giant that was erected there because there was a Green Giant factory there at one time, and now it's become a number of different other companies. But Blue Earth's also famous because when I-90 from Boston and I-90 from Seattle met, it met just on the north edge of Blue Earth. Mm. And just like the railroads at Promontory, Utah, where they drove Golden Spike, when they met there, I think it was in the mid-'70s, they actually painted a strip of the interstate gold. Now they've redone the interstate since that time, and they wouldn't allow them to paint the interstate gold, but I think there's some gold markings and at least a sign that indicates on the side of the road where the interstates met. So it's a famous little town for 4,000 people.
Yeah, there's so much history in those small towns. I love driving through them just because there's things that you see that you can't see anywhere else.
Yeah.
You have early memories growing up in Minnesota. Can you talk about did you always kind of have an idea what you wanted to do for a career, or did you go through various ideas in your mind?
I thought of I had three things I kind of thought of. Number one was possibly being a minister. I grew up Presbyterian. The other one was possibly being a chiropractor. But obviously, I ended up in broadcasting. And actually, as a kid back in the 60s growing up, I was born in 1954. I had, like a lot of kids probably those days, little transistor radio when they first came out. And at night would sit in my bed and go around and try and listen to all the stations I can get. And, we would get, we were fairly close to the Twin Cities, so we could get Twin City stations. But at night, a lot of those clear channel stations, and clear channel means at night in particular, there's nobody in that frequency to block the channel. Mm-hmm. But my gosh, I'd listen to Chicago, I'd listen to Little Rock, Arkansas, Denver once in a while, New York City, Cleveland, Texas, San Antonio, WOAI. And it really got me to thinking about what those towns and communities were like and what it'd be like to live there. So that kind of really spurred my interest in broadcasting.
So the power of the airwaves and how far they reach kind of appealed to you.
That's exactly right. When you're a kid growing up in a little town of 4,000 people, that and all the television shows. I can remember watching a show called Kojak. Telly Savalas starred as a police, I think it was a lieutenant in New York City, and they chased down thieves throughout New York City. And I can remember thinking, God, wouldn't it be neat to live in a big city like New York City with so much going on? now you couldn't pay me enough to live there.
Yeah. Kind of a philosophical thing, though, now that you talk about that you had these 2 or 3 different things. I read somewhere, and I don't know if it's true or not, you can tell me if you agree, that the old advice that says you can do whatever you want isn't necessarily correct for people, because most people have 1 or 2 things that they are exceptionally gifted at or they excel at. So what I was reading was that you need to cultivate those things that you're best at. Do you think it's more of a wise idea to go for that one thing that's in you that you have a passion for? Or do you think it's kind of a wide open slate when you're trying to decide what you want to do, and you can do whatever you want?
Well, here's the way I kind of look at it. I mean, a lot of people are forced by circumstances or limitations to do things that maybe isn't their calling, or maybe isn't something they really want to do. But I am a firm believer that if you can find something you like to do, that it sure makes that job, and it sure makes your life a lot better. I know a lot of people who for years have gotten up in the morning and gone to a job that they really do not care for, or in many cases dislike intensely.
Oh, yeah.
But they have to do it. I've been lucky in that I almost look at what I do sort of like maybe what a minister does, that it's a calling. I really feel this is not just a job to me. I feel it's a calling. I feel I do have a commitment to serve the people in my community. And everybody, when they hear that you're an anchor person on television, it's like, well, how many million a year? How long did it take you to get your first 6-figure contract? And I got to tell you, and you know this as well as I do, that is a very rare commodity in a Sioux City, Iowa, which is probably around market 145. We have a metro area here, probably over 100,000 people. You just don't make that kind of money. In fact, I think people would be surprised sometimes at the salaries, and particularly of the reporters that start here.
Speaking of that, so you're working in a fairly small market, which gains you quite a bit of notoriety in a community that size. My question on that is, and I've always wondered, is, there's some perks that are associated with notoriety, but then on the flip side of the coin, are there ever times where you're just not in the best mood, and you're in the grocery store, in the cereal aisle, and you're just praying that nobody approaches you that morning because you're just really not feeling it?
I tell you, for the most part, that hasn't happened to me. I really do think it's harder on the women in the business, the anchor women that I have worked with, or as I jokingly refer to as my TV wives, and they refer to me as their TV husbands. I think there's a certain expectation, even on the air. It's harder for women to dress. I mean, guys can basically wear almost every day the same sports coat.
Yeah.
Can wear almost every day the same shirt, white or powder blue. All you got to do is wear a different tie. Mm-hmm. But it's a lot harder on the ladies, and I think it's more difficult on them when they go out in public too. It's a little harder for them sometimes to let down.
Okay. So there's not been too many instances where you're like, oh,
No, no. I do joke with people that I do have to go out of town to sin. so, but even sometimes, depending on how far you go, because we've gone to places like Des Moines, Minneapolis, Omaha, and it seems like I'm always running into somebody who knows me from anchoring on television. So even then, I have to be more careful.
yeah. I mean, you're always in the public eye, whether you realize it or not. Somewhere, even
Yep.
one of the one of the distinguishing factors about you is that you, by circumstances not necessarily always under your control, you've ended up working at every station in your market, every TV station.
Yes. Yeah.
And
That's kind of that's a rarity.
yeah, that's a rarity, and which it kind of gives you an insight into the differences between the parent companies of the broadcasting. And one of the things that people say is people don't necessarily quit a job; they'll quit a boss or a manager. Is the parent company kind of the key to the quality of life for people that work in the television stations and television business?
There is an influence, no doubt, and it can be different from station to station depending on the autonomy, how autonomous a particular station or its managers can be. I worked when I originally came to Sioux City in early 1991. Worked for KTIV, the NBC affiliate, and that's a family-owned company. And I can remember the first time that the owners came to the station. It was the first time I had ever saw them, and they walked in, and the head guy saw the janitor over there and said, "Hi, so and so, how you doing?" And I thought, my God, he knows the name of the janitor in the building. It really impressed me, and so they probably have a little more flexibility. I've worked for other ones that are somewhat smaller corporations. Right now, I work for a fairly large corporation. In fact, it's the largest holder of television stations in the country, Sinclair Broadcast Group out of Baltimore.
Mm-hmm.
And they have certain ways they want all their affiliates to do things, certain things that they do require. And sometimes those can be frustrating because you may not quite understand what their reasoning is. But sometimes they're way ahead of the curve. They have done a lot more research or had the ability to do things and see trends across the country that maybe you in a smaller market haven't. So there's a give and take on all of that.
Okay. When you got into TV and when you were fresh into it, I guess you had a little radio background before that, right?
Yep, exactly.
When you got into the TV side of things, were there things that came more and less natural to you? I mean, was the writing part of it something easy, but maybe the on-air presence took some time to get used to? Were there things?
Well, I tell you, I think my radio background, I started in my little hometown station when I first went to college. I went south across the border at Iowa State University in Ames, and I would go back weekends or on holidays and would work at that little small town radio station, basically doing everything. I actually think my first job at the radio station in Blue Earth was he sent me out to collect past due bills. And I got a portion of the past due bills. I thought, my God, I want to be a disc jockey. I want to spin the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. I don't want to have to go down and track down deadbeats and try and get money out of them.
Yeah.
I think I painted the garage. I mean, you name it, you do it all. I did sports, I did weather, did news, and I absolutely loved it. But I think people who just go directly in TV, having that radio background really, I think, helped me because you learn to ad lib a little bit more. You're just a little bit more comfortable. And television nowadays, as most people know, there's a lot of live shots, a lot of live stuff going on TV. And I think having that ability to operate off your feet was a big advantage for me. Television is a little bit of a different animal in that you're writing to the visuals. The visuals control what television does. Mm-hmm. And so you can't be talking about, say, a city council meeting and seeing a fire on the screen. You know? So you have to kind of match up and you write that way. And the other thing I tell people is that and I think you've experienced this as you go through high school or into college and stuff, you're asked to write a paper or write something for a class. And of course, you want to write it as long and as extensive and big, long sentences and lots of information, because that's how you get graded usually. Mm-hmm. In broadcasting, it's just the opposite. People only have a split second to hear and see what it is you're saying. And so I tell people writing for broadcasting is like writing a children's book. See spot run, period. Spot runs up the hill, period. It's got to be short, very succinct, and what we call nickel and dime words. So it's a different animal, but once you get the hang of it, it works. And I also tell people that you write like you talk. When you write an English paper or something, it's very formal. Well, in broadcasting, it's not. And I sometimes will actually literally say a story out of my own mouth, out of my own mind, mm-hmm. to get a feel for how I might write it.
So you don't necessarily want to use words that are so far above everybody's head that 50% of the population don't know, certain vocabulary.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And you got to keep those sentences short and succinct.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I always liked about you, and because there's the day-to-day pressure of day-to-day news where you got to crank out a news package and cover this story and get this soundbite on a traffic accident or a fire somewhere. The thing that I kind of appreciated when I worked with you was that you'll do these things on the side that are kind of like local historical stories, and they might require a week or two or a month research and planning to do it. Is that your favorite thing to do when you have the liberty to do it?
Yeah, it really is. I enjoy history, and I'm a real history buff, and I remember lots of just weird stuff. and it's kind of fun when the new kids come to Sioux City. I tell them about some of the history of the community and some of the famous people who lived here, and everybody's kind of blown away by that. But I love telling those stories, and they do take more time because you got to do a lot more research. Luckily, we have a very good museum here that's got folks there that have got a lot of old pictures and information, and so I do that. When I was at KCAU Channel 9, I did a series that I really enjoyed called Where Are They Now? Where did the old Channel 9 people go? Mm-hmm. And some of them ended up major market anchors in Los Angeles who you see periodically in TVs and movies playing a reporter. Just all sorts of different people who've gone on to do other things, and that was a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I enjoyed hearing the story from Fritz, the old station manager at KMAG. He was telling me about how Don Stone had at one time told Tom Brokaw when he was working in Sioux City that he wouldn't amount to much.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, here's Tom Brokaw 50 years later, just doing fine.
Yeah.
But that's another thing, though. And that's another thing. This business, as are many, I suppose, are very subjective. That, one news director or one group of people can like something and think it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, and another news director or another group of people doesn't. And so it's very subjective. I mean, that's why there's so much movement in the business.
Mm-hmm. Do you have particular stories that you worked on that were high-profile stories over the years that really stuck with you? I'm sure you do. Anything in particular?
I did a story in Des Moines, kind of an investigative piece years and years ago, kind of in cooperation with the Twin Cities television station. And we found out that a local police sergeant was among a group of people who were spinning back the odometers on cars. Mm-hmm. And we staked the place out. We got a hidden camera and saw the police officer go in and out. And we did get some pressure from the police department not to run the story, but, obviously we ran it, and he ended getting drummed out of the police department. We kind of broke up that ring. So that was one. But, there have been some real other things of interest, too, not necessarily me directly related. But, I don't know if I've ever told you the story, but I really kind of credit Ronald Reagan with me actually getting into the business full time. And what happened was I had, as a senior at Iowa State, and gotten a job working weekends at WHO News Radio in Des Moines. And Ronald Reagan had been a sportscaster at the company stations in Des Moines and also in Davenport, Iowa at one point.
I didn't know that.
And yes, exactly. He was a sportscaster known as Dutch Reagan. And there was a Sunday, every Sunday morning, the Des Moines Register, the big newspaper in Iowa, comes out with some kind of a poll. At that time it did. And the poll showed that the vast majority of Iowans supported Ronald Reagan to become president of the United States. Now, I think he had been, I think he was not governor at the time, but he had been governor of California. And I thought, wow, that would, I knew the connection with Reagan, and I wonder if I could possibly get a hold of him to get some comment on that. Mm-hmm. So it was a Sunday morning. I called the radio station out in Los Angeles, and they had a contact person, and some of your listeners may remember the gentleman that was basically Reagan's spokesman, Lynn Nofziger. And they had a number for Lynn, and I managed to get a hold of it and explain the situation to him and asked him if Mr. Reagan might be able to call me and we could do an interview. And sure as heck, he called. And I cut the audio interviews up and made a couple of stories out of it, and it aired the next morning on a Monday morning. And I'm convinced that the station management was so impressed I got a hold of him that they hired me when the next full-time slot came open.
That's a resourceful guy, that Larry.
So, but it was funny. Another story with Ronald Reagan too. When I was at WHO Television, I'd gone from the radio side to the TV side, and shortly after President Reagan had got shot, I think it was maybe within the year, he was coming back to the building. We had just built a new building in downtown Des Moines, and he was going to be coming back to do an interview with the sportscaster who had replaced him, a gentleman by the name of Jim Zabel. Mm-hmm. Anybody who follows Hawkeye sports knows that Jim was an athlete at the University of Iowa and later became a very well-respected and gung-ho University of Iowa broadcaster for football and basketball. Mm-hmm. Anyhow, Reagan was to come back, and the security measures were unbelievable. There literally were snipers on buildings around the station. The crew, all of the crews that weren't directly involved, we had color-coded badges assigned to us for certain parts of the building. Mm-hmm. And so many minutes, I think it was like a half an hour before he arrived and 15 minutes after he left, we could not leave that color-coded area of the building. And the other thing that was fascinating was the radio station was on the second floor of the WHO building. Well, they didn't want the president having to climb any stairs or going in an elevator. So what they did was they found a way to wire a radio station from up top and get all the wiring down to a large television station on the first floor. And that's where the interview would take place. And what they were going to do, rather than have the president pull up to the front of the building and get out and walk into the building, some of you may know that in the old days, TV stations sometimes had really big doors and big studios where they could pull cars in and do car ads. Mm-hmm. And so what they decided to do was they were going to open those big doors, have him drive into what was at that time a TV studio, get out, walk a few feet over, sit down, and do the radio interview there. Well, that was all well and good, except that the station had to call in a structural engineer because the weight of the president's car, it's like 10 tons, would have cracked the floor. And they had to devise a system that the car could drive on that would distribute the weight enough so it would not crack the floor of the studio. Wow. So, yeah, that was something I will never, ever forget.
Yeah, I had no idea about any of that with Reagan, so that's good to know.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, and you don't have to answer this question, because when you work, you've worked over the years with several co-anchors, and the on-air chemistry and rapport has to be pretty good. At least it needs to appear that way. Have there been challenges over the years with any individuals where you just kind of really had to work at it?
Yeah, I have been very lucky. I have had here in Sioux City and basically everywhere I've worked, I've gotten along well with my co-anchors. I don't want maybe one or two of them. There just wasn't it didn't click quite as well. And that's just based on personality. That's just natural. You throw a bunch of people together, there's going to be some you get along with better than others. But gosh, I have been so blessed. When I was at KTIV, I worked with Christy Vermullum, who I'm sure you remember having been in this market, and tremendous friends, just even to this day. And even as competitors, I mean, as competitors, we would, do whatever we could to slit each other's throats, but professionally, everybody wants to get the big story and have the big scoop and that type of thing. Over at Channel 9, I was lucky enough to work with Jenna Renstrom. And there was quite an age difference. Jenna came in just barely a year or two out of college, I think. And here I was probably in my, close to mid 50s and stuff, but just great friends there. When you were at K-Mag, Leslie Rupiper, who I anchored with, co-anchored with, to this day, just wonderful people. And right now, on my second stint at K-Mag and also doing Fox 44, KPTH Fox 44 News in Sioux City, Dana Castillo, who is my co-anchor now, who's also our news director. And we just get along wonderfully. So I have been very, very blessed.
Okay, great. The television business, at least the local stations, it's almost like a professional football career for some of them, isn't it? There's a career, kind of an average career span, and then a lot of people decide to get out of it, whether it's economical issues or they get burned out on strange hours. I know you took a hiatus at one point. I'm not sure if that would apply in this situation, but was there a reason why you decided to take a hiatus and go do the real estate thing for a couple years?
Yeah, exactly. There was. I had been in the broadcasting business for a while, and anybody who's in the broadcasting business, every once in a while you get kind of kicked around, and things that you don't want to happen actually happen. But it's a very tough business. The thing that happened to me was, first of all, you work nights if you're an anchor person. You have family, you have kids that are growing up and going to school and going to games, and you miss a lot of those activities. And I had done it long enough where I felt that I had experienced what I wanted to experience. I wanted to be home a little bit more. And I had always had a dream of doing a real estate television show and being a realtor. And so I was fortunate enough to be able to pursue that dream and got an opportunity and literally did produce a television real estate show on the same station I had been working at, as well as doing some real estate. I might have stayed on with that, but here in Sioux City at that time, we had kind of a bad economic time. A company who some of you may still remember called Gateway, the computer company, basically started kind of to fold up and having some problems then, and that basically kind of really put a stinker into the market. So that led me to seek an opportunity where you and I first met over at KMAG, the CBS affiliate. And so I was there for about 3 years, and they went through a big shakeup, as you know, and many of us were asked to leave our salary and depart the doors. And then that's how I ended up over at KCAU Channel 9 in Sioux City, and I was there 8 years until I got too sick. I had a liver problem, eventually had the liver transplant, and was out of work for about a year. Before I came back to KMAG again and its new sister station, KPTH Fox 44. So there have been times I've been asked to leave the business, and times I voluntarily left. And, sometimes I think had I been successful at any of those times out of the business, I may not have done this anymore.
Kind of that was the reason I asked the question, because I have heard some journalists and anchors say, hey, I left, but I came back because there's a bug in me for this. And I was just curious if that was a situation with you.
Well, there sort of is. I mentioned that higher calling. There sort of is. It's kind of what I do. I think I'm okay at it, or I'm fairly competent at it, and it's in my comfort zone. So I right now I'm very happy to be back. I'm hoping to hang on until I can retire someday. I like the people, the station I work. I like what I'm doing. 99 out of 100 days I like going to work. So I'm hoping that. But a lot of people don't have some of the opportunity I've had. I mean, I've been so blessed that, like you said earlier, how many people have been able to work at every TV station in a market, and in some cases work there more than once.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely
right.
Right.
And other people don't get that opportunity. Luckily I'm anchoring. I'm in a position where I'm not getting rich in Sioux City, Iowa, but I'm not a pauper either. A lot of these kids who do this for a few years, they're not making a lot of money. They're working odd hours, they're working weekends, they're working overnights, and eventually you just go, hey, I want to have a different life and I want to make a little more money. And you can't blame them.
Yeah, I still don't know how some of those people get up at 3 a.m. or 3:30 in the morning to go to work. It's just...
it's a killer. It's a killer.
Might as well stay awake all night.
Exactly.
Let me ask you, when there are actual public safety issues in the community, whether it be weather or somebody on the loose or whatever it is, there's all the eyes are on you for direction from the community. Is there a higher pressure in those situations on you? Do you feel it, or do you manage to keep an even keel on everything, regardless of what the situation is in the community?
Well, I think there is more added pressures, particularly in situations. We hear that term breaking news now. Things that are happening, and things that are happening on the fly. You're not always sure as to what's happening, but you feel the pressure that you need to kind of let people know as best as you can as to what's going on. I have a tremendous amount of respect for the people I work with who do weather, and I know people complain it's the only place you can be wrong and still keep a job, and that's really unfair, because for the most part they're much more accurate than people like to pretend they are. And I'll tell you, I've seen weather people at all the stations I have put in tremendously long hours. They're very dedicated to what they do. I've seen them, with tornado outbreaks, particularly here in this area of the upper Midwest, be on the air for hours at a time. It's a tough gig, and the same with sports. When you get tournament time coming around, people don't realize that these stations, they don't have an unlimited staff, and usually you'll have 2, maybe 3 sports people. And I'll tell you, they work a lot of 12, 14, 16-hour days when sports gets hot and heavy.
Mm-hmm. Regarding interviewing, this is the interviewer asking the interviewee question about interviewing. When you conducted interviews over the years, and I'm not talking about just the everyday house fire or whatever it is with a fireman, interviewing itself, was there a skill that you developed as far as asking the right questions and leading the person to kind of open up a little bit? I know there's generally, when you walk up to somebody and approach them on the street, there's a little bit of hesitance to really open up and talk. How do you get around that?
Well, I think the biggest thing, first of all, if I know I'm doing an interview, what I like to try and do is get background. Just learn a little bit more about the people, kind of get a sense of what questions it is I might ask. There may be certain hot topics that are happening at that time. And I think, at least for me, what I really try and do is I don't try to be confrontational. I do ask tough questions, but try and do it in a polite way, I guess, in order to get a response rather than a reaction. And so that's kind of how I really try to do it, and I think that works. And the other thing is I give them an opportunity to talk. One of my favorite questions at the end is, there something I haven't touched upon that you'd like to add?
Mm-hmm. Here's another philosophical question about news in general. It seems like, at least to me, that the contemporary news and the cable news and all that concerned with ratings is that news nowadays seems a lot more veiled opinions included in the news. And if you read the headlines on some stories, it almost indicates the slant of the story before you even get into the meat of the story. When you were coming up and you were going through school and broadcasting, was there more of a focus on transparently passing the information on to the audience and then letting the conclusions be drawn as they may?
Well, here's what I think the problem is, and you hear a lot about fake news now, but what has happened because of the internet and the growth of technology is that you have far more many options to go get information. And that information doesn't necessarily have to be correct, or it may have a certain slant. And I think what happens a lot of times is people go to seek out information that fits their preconceived notion.
Confirmation bias.
It used to be, yes, exactly. I think the bottom line here is that you can seek out information. You can find a lot of places. And it is hard. There is a blurring, and even somewhat, I think, not so much necessarily on the evening newses, but I think on the cable channels, there is a blurring.
Mm-hmm.
And that blurring happens because, it used to be, in our station, our company still does editorials,
mm-hmm.
where they get out and they have a person who says, hey, this is what we think, it's wrong, blah, 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 so on and so forth. But that's an editorial.
It's labeled.
You know that is it basically is labeled. It's very clearly labeled. And I think what happens is on the cables, there's so many people who are hired to be analysts or to have a show that people just assume that's the way it is. These people are giving a certain slant one way or another, be it right wing, be it left wing, whatever it is. And there's not this clear delineation between what is opinion and what we as reporters believe or what are the facts. The other thing too, I think there was a real emphasis on trying to present both sides of a story. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that every story you do has to have one side than the other side, but what it does mean is that over the course of time you are presenting the different viewpoints
mm-hmm.
of a story. So I think just with so many more options out there, it's just a lot easier for people to be fooled.
Mm-hmm. So shifting gears, I want to go into another topic now relating to, it's something that very few people have ever had to undergo. And correct me if I'm wrong, because I did a little research, but sometime around 2010, you started noticing a dull pain kind of on your right side that gradually got worse and eventually it manifested itself into some more symptoms. Can you talk a little bit about the beginning of that and how it progressed?
Yeah, I basically felt like on the right side of my stomach that I had like a numbness or a certain I pulled a muscle, I guess is the best way I can describe that.
Mm-hmm.
And so my family doctor, I mentioned it to him after a while, after it didn't go away, and he said, well, let's just keep an eye on it, see what happens here in a few months. And eventually we ended up taking an x-ray of it, which showed I had an enlarged liver. And that started the process of trying to determine what was happening with my liver. It took a while, but basically we determined that I had cirrhosis of the liver. Now, when people hear the words cirrhosis of the liver, the first thing they assume is that you're a big boozer.
Yeah.
And that is probably one of the more frustrating things that I fight, and I try and get the message out. But the reality is only about 20% of liver problems have anything at all to do with the use of alcohol.
Uh-huh.
In my case, mine turned out to be what's called autoimmune hepatitis. And it's not a hepatitis that you catch like by a needle or you breathe it in or by touching something. What it is your body's immune system says, hey, something's wrong in a part of your body. We need to go out and attack it. And so it goes out. It could attack the bloodstream. In my case, it decided to attack my liver. Mm-hmm. They don't know why it develops. I have no clue as to why it happened to me. But when you have autoimmune hepatitis, The liver is one of the few organs that can regenerate itself. And in some cases, they can do the surgeries and help the liver regenerate itself and kind of grow and do that. But with autoimmune hepatitis, you have to have a transplant. You have to get a different liver.
Mm-hmm. In the beginning, the doctors kind of told you that it might be something that you could kind of keep at bay with maybe diet and changing a few dietary things.
It's not so much you can keep at bay because it's going to continue to progress. But what they do, every day in America, roughly 17,000 people a day are waiting for a new liver. Over 100,000 people are waiting for some type of transplant. And of those 17,000, only a third will ever get a new liver. So the vast majority of people die before they're able to get a transplant. So what they try and do is they try and make you limp along as long as you possibly can on that liver before they have to think about putting you on a transplant list. So we did that with me, and eventually I kind of went downhill fairly quickly. I noticed by the fall of 2011 that I was losing energy. I had no energy to do things. I was getting jaundiced. By January of 12, I remember I'd gone home for dinner one day after the 6 o'clock news. I came in, sat down at my desk, and was getting ready to type stories at Channel 9, KCAU. And whatever was in my brain would not go to my fingers. Mm-hmm. And that was the first sign that I was really in trouble. And eventually I simply could not work anymore. And eventually had to go through the testing that you have to go through to see if you can get on the transplant list. I got on the transplant list, and I was one of the rare people who was fortunate enough to actually get a new liver.
Okay. Let me ask you on that, backing up a little bit, because I want to go a little bit through the process if we can. When you first got this diagnosis, is the shock the first thing that hits you?
It's kind of like here's what's really funny about this in a way. I've never been a drinker. I mean, I would like a cold beer with a bratwurst once in a while, or maybe have a little something around Christmas, and I would go out with people and socially drink. But I've had members of family who have had terrible problems with alcohol over the years. Mm-hmm. Not my direct family, so it wasn't anything that was genetic, but people that were family. And oddly enough, I'm the guy who gets cirrhosis of the liver and has a liver problem, and none of them.
Yeah, it's like that story about the person who never smoked a cigarette in their life developing lung cancer.
They were just like, what? How is that possible? But so that was kind of one of the ironic things. But so that was it. And my story is still somewhat a little bit more unique, not only in the fact that I got a liver, but the fact that I had gone through testing at the Nebraska Medical Center in Omaha. I can't say enough what a fabulous place that is and fabulous people down there. But I'd gone through the testing. It takes you a few days. They are simply going to check you for everything because they're not going to put one of those really hard to find livers in somebody who's been a smoker and has lung cancer, mm-hmm. or somebody who continues to drink alcohol if that's the problem, because they want to put it in somebody who has a really good chance of surviving with it.
Yeah.
But so I did get on the list, and literally within, I think, the first 2 or 3 days of being on the list, we got a call. Got a liver for you. Get down here within 4 hours. And, so we get in the car and we're driving to Omaha, and I think I called everybody I've ever met in my life. I am ecstatic. I've got a new liver. I'm going to live.
Yeah.
Get to Omaha. I'm on the gurney. The anesthetist had just talked to me. They're going to start wheeling me into surgery, and my wife's cell phone goes off. And it's the surgery team telling her to get me dressed and go back home because the liver isn't good enough to put in me.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, so we pretty much went home that night thinking that was it. When would I ever? First of all, it's miraculous I got a call so early after getting on the list. But most people never ever get a liver. So we pretty much went home that night thinking that was the end. And once by God's good grace, or the creator, or whoever you want to call it, the next day, not a week, not a month, not a year, from then. The next day we get a call, we've got another one, get down here. And that's the one we put in me, and here I am today, almost 5 years later.
Wow, incredible. So how long were you waiting in the dark where you didn't know if you were going to get a liver? What was the complete span of that?
So I really noticed it, like I said, in the fall of 2011. I really started to feel the effects of it, but by March of 2012 is when I had the transplant.
So luckily in your case, you weren't one of those people that was losing all hope, waiting for months on end. You really were.
Well, I was getting pretty sick. In fact, that's one of the reasons why they have what they call the MELD score, MELD. I don't know what it stands for, but it's a bunch of tests they give to determine certain things in your body, how you're doing. My MELD score was very high. I was starting to have what I call blackouts. Basically, your liver does a number of functions in your body. One of them is take the impurities out of your blood. And when it's not doing that very well, it starts affecting your brain. And I was starting to have these blackouts where I would literally black out for hours or a day at a time. But the weird thing about the blackouts is you're still doing stuff. My first blackout, I was sitting in a lounge chair here at my home in Sioux City on a Monday or Tuesday afternoon. And the next thing I knew, I woke up the following afternoon at Mercy Medical Center. But in between that time, I had talked to my wife. I'd had dinner. I'd done all sorts of stuff.
Wow.
But I was doing crazy stuff. My wife knew I was in having real troubles when I asked her at dinner if she'd butter my socks.
Yeah.
So that's, yeah. So, and there are stories about people who have these blackouts and they go out, they get in their car and they drive around the city and they smash blocks and blocks of cars, go back home, park, and go back to bed, never know they did it.
Wow, crazy.
So it is really weird. And all I remember, Travis, was like you just flicked your fingers and there was a frame of black. That's all I remember.
Can't imagine. A little bit then on the emotional kind of mental side of things. When a lot of people are diagnosed with something so dire, there's a tendency to withdraw and not burden anyone. And then on the opposite side, there's the people that really need to be surrounded by supportive voices to talk. And where did you fall on that spectrum? I think if it was me, I'd try to withdraw and just not bother anybody and just deal with it.
You know, with me, I think the first of it was a lot of people go through it. It's a denial. Geez, me? Can that be right? How is that possible? I can remember thinking to myself one day while I was driving, I don't know if it was to work or whatever, just saying to myself, my God, I'm dying. You know, I'm dying. You know, we know we're dying. Eventually we're going to die, but to really realize that it's a lot closer around the corner is different. And I think the other thing with me, what happened to me with this is it saps your strength so much. By the end, Travis, I was so tired and worn out. I can almost remember knowing that I was going to go into surgery or for the transplant and thinking, well, you know, here we are, and nothing I can do about it, and that's it. Let's just see what happens.
So you'd almost reached an acceptance of some sort.
Yes, exactly. And I can remember telling myself, you know, I've done everything I can to hopefully raise my kids the right way so they know right from wrong and that they can survive and blah, 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 blah. And you're just so worn out and tuckered out. It's like, okay, let's just do this. What will happen will happen.
Yeah. It's so interesting because so many people don't have to encounter this.
Yeah.
I've heard it said that when you're faced with something like that, a life and death diagnosis, that suddenly everything that's important to you and means something comes to the forefront, and then all the insignificant things just kind of drop away. Was that kind of what happened?
There were a lot of things that I thought was important that no longer became important. And it's funny, now that I'm better and you turn around the corner again, you start getting interested in those things again.
Human nature.
You know, you start living life again, and you get back into life, and at one point, some points with me, I stop and think, good God, I almost died a few years ago. What's the big deal? And I do have a totally different attitude about life now. I just try not to sweat the small stuff. I really do. And I just am not. I'm sick. I'm going to be 63 in September. I just am not going to, take on too much responsibility, too much of a load, and kill myself just doing that when life is just too short.
Yeah. I think luckily you were given a new outlook, a new lease on life.
Exactly.
That a lot of people don't. In some ways,
Yep.
It's a blessing in some ways, but it's a blessing that nobody really wants to have to go through.
Yep, exactly. And the other thing I've really done with this, here's how I kind of, I don't know if you call it justify, but with my having been able to get the new liver and having survived, is that I really in some ways think that the good Lord or my higher power saved me so that I can go out in the community and sort of spread the message about the importance of being an organ donor and dispel a lot of the myths about transplantation being an organ donor. Mm-hmm. I really have made it my mission in life to go out and talk to organizations, talk to people, and do what I can to give other people like me the opportunity that I had.
Yeah, there's so many people that are sitting on waiting lists for all types of conditions.
Oh, yeah.
And I guess most people don't realize how easy it is to make the change for someone.
Yep, exactly.
So, no, I think I can safely speak for a lot of people that are really glad that you pulled through this and that you're back in action after that bout.
Well, I tell you what, a lot of people who out there who may be listening to this, they think Sioux City, Iowa, where's that? What's that? Just a podunk little town. And it's not a big community. Like I said, the actual metro area is probably a little more over 100,000 people, and we do reach a 3-state area. But boy, I tell you, I have been so fortunate. The people came together, and gosh, I got cards and letters and donations from people I've never met. I mean, just viewers who would send in a note or send a $20 bill. We've had people who donated. They did a number of fundraisers for me. Mm-hmm. A lot of people don't get that. So I was very fortunate, and I'm just glad that I could stay here and just continue to live in this community and hopefully be around for a long time.
Yeah, it's nice that you have a platform that you can help other people from too.
Yeah, exactly.
Let me wrap up here just by asking. I always kind of like to wrap up with down the road. You've done news, you've done real estate, you've done a few things over your years. Are you going to be one of those guys that is in the backyard in the hammock someday, or you think you're always going to keep moving?
Well, that's a really good question. I guess here's my basic game plan. Like I said, I'm going to be 63 in September. I hit retirement at 66. I am hoping that I can continue to work for a couple of years. My contract is good until I think next year, and if I can swing it where they hopefully will want to keep me, I'd like to work a few more years past that and do a little double dipping on Social Security and my salary. Simply on the fact, having had the transplant and being out of work for a year kind of set us back a little financially.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
I mean, it's estimated that a transplant like mine, and I can guarantee it was well past $400,000. Now, fortunately, I did have good insurance, and like I said, I was very fortunate. A lot of people helped raise money on our behalf. But a year without work, there's still bills to pay. They don't pay all of it. Mm-hmm. And so I need to do a little catching up, but someday I'll probably stop and maybe do something else. I've always joked that I'd like to run the senior center because most of the people there would probably be people who watched me. So
there you go.
We'll see. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, it's always been a pleasure talking to you. You've always been cordial, and one of the great things about you is you're one of those people who's as genuine in person as you are on air. So
Well, I appreciate that. I really do.
Yeah, and it's been, informational getting to hear a little bit about your life in the broadcasting business and some of the struggles you've overcome. So I want to say thanks for talking to me, and I wish you more continued success and health.
Thank you so much, Travis. It was a fun time. I appreciate it. It was great to work with you. And if you're back in town, holler.
Yeah, I definitely will.